Lakeland Public Television's Common Ground is brought to you by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund.
My name is Noel Mills. I'm a retired heart surgeon, and I have a shop where I make violins and cellos and violas. I got interested in violins when I read an article in Scientific American in 1963. And I said, I'm going to make me a violin. And I read the article maybe 5 times. I was an intern at Columbia Presbyterian in New York. And that year I got married. Kennedy was killed. When my wife and I had a chance to go upstate New York to get some wood, I went and bought some wood, and I carried it with me for 40 years because I never had a chance to build a violin. But it was still in the back of my mind. During the Vietnam War, I actually took the wood to the 25th Casualty, thinking maybe during the nights or what have you, I'd have time to carve on it, but it just never happened. I had to retire completely before I started making violins. This is a piece of spruce, which is what is usually used for the top plate. And this is flamed maple, and you can see the flames here in the hard maple, and that's the usual type of wood that's used for the back and also for the sides. And of course, when this is stained and varnished, these flames will come out and be much more prominent. Another name is fiddleback maple. Nobody knows what causes. They have to cut the tree down and look before they know whether it's going to be in there. You can see this spruce front has been cut and book-halved, so to speak, and here's the junction of where it is glued together. So that would be the front. Here again is the so-called fiddleback, and you can see the curls, and this actually is basswood from Minnesota. And the person cut this down in his yard and didn't know it, but happened to recognize the fact afterwards that indeed it had curls in it and would possibly make a real good tone wood. Okay, this is a piece of tone wood. As you can see from the front, it's curly maple. You can see the curls in there. Once again, this would be for the back. And you can see how this is opened up so that what you would do would finish the cut right here, which is about a couple of 3 inches, and then take one side and you would turn it around, smooth these edges very precisely, and glue those 2 edges together. So it would be so-called book matched. While we're talking about wood, I have a friend in New Zealand, and that friend told me that he was going to send me some special wood, and there's a tree in New Zealand called a kauri tree. They're rare, and it's against the law to cut them. The early settlers just wiped them out. It's a very hard wood, and now the only way you can get kauri wood is to take and pull one up out of the marsh, just as is done in Louisiana with the bald cypress. They call them sinkers. Well, he sent me the wood, and this is a piece of this kauri wood, and this is made into the back because it's similar to the maple insofar as transmission of sound across a grain and with the grain. And this piece of wood actually was carbon dated, and it's 40,000 years old. Now, this particular piece of wood, if you can notice, the lines of growth are extremely close together. And this is bald cypress. It comes from Krotz Springs, Louisiana, and was pulled up out of the marsh. And lo and behold, it has a fairly good ring to it when you carve it out. And I made one of this kauri wood back and a sinker bald cypress several years ago, And a lady who's a fine violinist in Mankato has that violin, and she brought it back up here after 3 years of playing it, and I stopped everything I was doing and started making a second one because I happened to have a second piece of kauri wood available to do that. Well, how did the old boys make these wonderful sounding instruments? That is really an enigma. And there are many, many theories as to why they did that or how they did that. Now, for a long time, they thought maybe the varnish was the secret of Stradivari and how he had this wonderful violins that he could make. But then that kind of went by the wayside, and more recently a theory came up that the reason why his wood was so good was that it was floated down the rivers and became mineralized. And then that theory kind of dropped by the wayside, and people looked at dendrochronology and they looked at climate, and they said, well, it looks like his wood is so good because he lived just after a mini ice age, and the grain in the wood was very, very, very close together. But even now there's a more current theory. There's the theory that there's a fungus that gets into this wood and actually changes the lignin, and that gives it a very special sound. So the truth of it is that that's an ongoing research project which has been going on for 100 years and will probably go on another 100 years, although many of the high-end, the really good violin makers with physics may be making violins that are going to actually be better than what the old boys like Stradivari and Guarneri were able to come up with. We just don't know. On this piece of wood, which is incompletely carved out, it's not finished, how much do you gouge out? How thin do you leave it? Well, there's a number of ways to determine that, but one of the ways to determine how much is gouged out is by using what is known as Chladni patterns. And you sprinkle glitter on a violin plate, and then this is over a speaker, which is right under here, and you turn on the speaker and you slowly increase the hertz of the speaker. And at a certain point, the glitter will begin to vibrate and will make a pattern. And that pattern will be still with the glitter at a point where there's a node that is a part of the violin that's not moving, and then the antinode will be the point where the glitter is bouncing. And right now that's E flat. So all of this will go into my data book as I'm working on this plate to carve it to the precise thickness. This tells me that I can do a little bit more insofar as taking wood from certain areas in this region and that region, and I'll do that and then retest. And I may not take but 1/10 of a millimeter or 2/10 of a millimeter of wood by scraping very carefully until I get precisely what I want insofar as the pattern and also the hertz. Well, what I do with the violins is through word of mouth, someone will hear that I make instruments and that I may give them away, and I find somebody who, is somewhat of a reasonable violin player. I don't mean some wonderful person, but a young person maybe, or someone who's even older and just needs a violin. I talk to them and make a decision whether one of my violins would fit their needs, and if it does, then I give them the violin on a consignment. I make a serious thing out of it, not just hand it to them. And the consignment says, number one, that they're not going to sell it crush it over their little brother's head, or they're not going to lend it to somebody, or they're not going to, you know, misuse it. Now, every violin gets nicks and dinks and stuff like that. That's part of having a stringed instrument, but you know what I mean. And then the second thing is they agree that they'll put it on their homeowner's policy, again, to show the seriousness of it. And then next, they can have and play that violin as long as I'm alive. When I die, my family has the option of, number one, letting them have it and continue to play it. And probably that's what's going to happen to most all of them. And the second thing is, if my family decides to sell the lot, then that person who has the instrument has first right of refusal. And so in that way, it's kind of win-win for everyone.
If you enjoyed this segment of Lakeland Public Television's Common Ground, consider making a contribution at lptv.org. If you have segment ideas pertaining to North Central Minnesota, contact us at legacy@lptv.org. Common Ground is funded by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund by the vote of the people on November 4th, 2008.